Coming up on the record, control of City Hall and county government on the ballot this fall, with crime a top concern for many voters across the region. The police unions backing Jack Coatar for president of the Board of Aldermen, and the Ethical Society of Police backing Republican Mark Mantovani in his race to replace Sam Page as county executive in St. Louis County. Both candidates joining us for the record, and Anita Manion joining us with reaction for the record. Plus, we set the record straight in the Republican race, in the Illinois governor's race, final debate just on Tuesday night. Thanks for joining us. I'm Mark Maxwell. We begin in St. Louis County, where Republicans feel rejuvenated with hopes that they might be able to defeat Democrat Sam Page. When Catherine Pinner, the primary victor, dropped out of the race, it created a quick vacuum. Into that hole jumped Mark Mantovani. He joins us now on the record. Thanks for joining us, and glad to have you with us.
Good to be here, Mark. Thanks for inviting me.
Did Republicans pick you for your principles, your positions, or for a strategic win here?
Well, I guess you'd have to ask them. I think they picked me because they recognize that I've been committed to trying to help our region progress for many years. And I think that the Republican Central Committee deserves a lot of credit for thinking outside the box, for trying to find somebody who can reach across the aisle and appeal to voters on both sides. That's the campaign we're running. We're running a campaign that's based on working with both Republicans and Democrats, because the challenges we've got in St. Louis County are big enough that it's going to take us all working together.
Some people might find intrigue in the idea. Some of our voters or viewers might remember you ran as a Democrat against Sam Page in the primary and came up just short, the runner-up there. They might see that as politically intriguing, that you would switch parties to run against him in a general election. But let's fast forward beyond the political intrigue, the palace intrigue there, and go right to what government would look like under a Mark Mantovani administration. What's the first thing you're changing on the job?
Well, I think, look, there are a number of major issues that we've got to deal with. We've got to deal with the fact that there's no crime plan that's been communicated by the St. Louis County Executive. Everyone knows that our crime issue in the region is the preeminent issue of our time, and the fact that there has been no appreciable effort by the county executive to deal with that, I think, is disappointing to many people. And so,
he says crime is down and substations are going up for police.
Substations are going up for what, about 3 hours ago, after five years of allocation of the Prop P money. The substations are going up as of this morning, 2 weeks before an election. And
are you suggesting it was political?
Well, I mean, I think that the costs have doubled over the course of the 5-year delay, and they're breaking ground 2 weeks before the election. We'll let people draw their own conclusions.
The reason Sam Page gives for that is because there are certain goals they want to set in diversity hiring and training. The people getting the work, getting the government money, they want to make sure it's not just going to rich white developers.
Yeah. So
would you call that red tape, or would you call that a worthy goal?
Oh, I think those goals are worthwhile. I just don't think it takes 5 years to achieve them.
Mm-hmm. Is there something, you come from the world of business, you've studied politics even at the college level, and also practiced that as a candidate for a little while. Is there something about the business background that you think gives you an advantage in government? And do you see the difference in the aim, one for profit, one for the public good?
So first of all, I think the most important thing to recognize is what the office that I'm seeking. I'm seeking the county executive's office, which is at its heart an administrative job. $1 billion budget, 4,000 employees who require leadership and a vision and a sense of being aligned with the mission of the county. That is, by definition, primarily an executive level job. That's why we call it as much in some respects. And I think that my years in business of running $100 million budgets and leading hundreds of employees are clearly solid training for that activity. And the other thing about that that is relevant about this is the county executive job is not one that really requires focus on political ideology. This is a job that is charged with making certain that the county government works effectively for the people of St. Louis County. And I think people in St. Louis County have seen enough of political infighting and are craving what is good government, which is reduction in chaos and the dysfunction that we've seen from the county government for the last few years.
It's interesting to note. I think an executive might find, say in business, say they found 20% in bloated spending, cut that spending. Shareholders would say, this guy's a genius, let's give him a raise. In government, you find 20% in spending, you cut that. Voters might say, that's cruel, you're hobbling the operations of government. Do you see that, is there a difference in how you would approach one or the other?
No, look, I think that any enterprise needs to be managed with an eye towards efficiency and to serving the vision of that enterprise. The vision, the objective of government is to make certain that we're serving the people of St. Louis County so that their primary needs are being met. Clearly, those are different objectives that one takes to a for-profit activity. But you know, the executive job requires leadership skills. It requires, I think, somebody who has demonstrated perhaps a modicum of leadership ability. And you know, those are the skills that I think I've demonstrated in my past that perhaps the county executive hasn't.
I wonder if you see a difference, or if you would make a distinction in response time or response style. I want to give you an example to an opportunity to respond to what we have learned about the high levels of radioactive lead discovered near the Coldwater Creek, sending students into remote learning at the Janet Elementary School. Some of that news developing even now as we're learning about some of those studies performed there. Sam Page released a statement today saying, quote, "I support the action taken by the school board and share the concern of the parents. The Department of Public Health," which would fall under your administration should you win, he says, quote, "is in close contact with the federal agencies responsible for testing and cleanup, and we will continue to closely monitor the situation." We've also seen some reporting that perhaps the county public health department saw the jurisdiction as something that fell under the Army Corps of Engineers. How aggressive should the county public health department be in adding to the surveillance, the studies, to see what exactly is the risk assessment to the people living nearby?
Look, this is such a situation, is such a grievous situation that I find it hard to sit still when I'm reading these stories and listening to this conversation. I don't want to make this a campaign issue, but the fact of the matter is that if I'm county executive, I am going to be the federal government's worst nightmare with respect to dealing with this thing. I think we've had leadership in this community that has piddled and twiddled and kicked the can down the road for decades instead of using their good office to incite activity from the federal government, to work with the people on the ground. I'm embarrassed for our community that we have allowed children to fall victim to these diseases for decades. And again, I don't want to make it a campaign issue. I'm just telling you that I won't rest until we have this thing cleaned up.
I don't mean to suggest this would be an easy task, but students are being sent into remote learning, virtual learning, going back home, and we know that there's a learning loss that happens now from looking at the pandemic. We have those examples. Is there some alternate site that might be safer? Is there some way? Can the county step in? Is it a school board decision? What level of involvement would you have in something like this, an emergency?
I would be very involved. Obviously, the school board has primary jurisdiction over the nature of the educational process, but I would be very involved working with the school board, trying to find alternative sites. My gosh, don't we have enough empty sites around the region that we can get these kids to attend school? It might take a little while to prepare them, but you get kids back in school as quickly as you can in a safe environment. I think by the way, Mark, I think we need to do more testing around there to find out exactly what the extent of the exposure is. I'm a little concerned that you know, we found this radioactivity in the school, and we're going to deal with it at the school level, and I don't know where it begins or ends. And I think that as a community, we have the responsibility to make certain that that area is safe.
Certainly a lot of people wondering what the risk radius is there, and reporting still yet to do. In our last 30 seconds before we let you go here and go to our next guest, I wonder, we've heard Sam Page in public comments just recently suggest that the budget in St. Louis County is in rough shape, and that after some period of time there might have to be some, I don't know if there could be tax increases. It sounds like he was almost inferring that. It sounds like there's just not enough revenue to go around. How could that be true with the record RAM settlement, the record federal COVID money? I know it's all a big lump sum, but do you see it, the budget problem or a solution differently?
No, it's a huge problem. We're going to have to evaluate how we're going to make this budget balance in the coming years. I think the objective is to make it balance without exhausting our infusions of capital from these other sources as much as possible. And so the first thing that I'll have to do as county executive is try to evaluate where, if there is waste in the budget, where it is and how we can reduce it and get the government back on sound footing.
Mark Mantovani, thanks for joining us on The Record. He is on the ballot November 8th, that election 3 weeks from yesterday, and 2 weeks from today, his opponent, Dr. Sam Page, will be joining us. But now we check in on the race for Board of Alderman President. Megan Green is the progressive Democrat running. She's the alderwoman running against Jack Coatar. Joining us now on The Record is St. Louis City Alderman Jack Coatar. He's also running for Board of Alderman President. Good to have you with us.
Thanks for having me on, Mark.
How would you govern the City Hall differently than it has been in the recent past?
Well, one, I think we need somebody, in light of all the corruption and indictments and things that have happened, we need somebody honest who can be a sort of neutral arbiter at the board, who can help, bring the board together, have consensus, and advance a legislative agenda. And I think that legislative agenda has to be focused first and foremost on the crime in this town and making people safe.
The Board of Aldermen certainly accomplishes work. It does things, but it also sets an agenda. It sets the focus of the city. The mayor does that too, but the City Hall leaders also send important signals to business, to police, to government. One of the signals it's sending right now is that it's not safe for politicians to meet in a big open building. President Biden said more than a month ago, the pandemic is over.
Yeah.
If you were elected Board of Aldermen president, would you have the members meeting in person?
I've been clear on this. If I'm elected, we're coming back to in-person meetings. Now, if the health department deems our chambers, which is very old and doesn't have any modern sort of ventilation, unsafe, there's a lot of other city buildings we could meet in. We go meet at the convention center. We own that. It's got plenty of space. We could meet at the Enterprise Center where the Blues play on Friday mornings. It's across the street from City Hall. We own it. There's ample space for us to meet and do our business in public and invite the public to attend. I think it's critically important that we get back in person. It sends a really bad message that City Hall is open for business, but if you come visit the Board of Aldermen, our doors are locked and the lights are out.
And people can't testify as easily. They can certainly dial on, but to those other members of the Board of Aldermen who may not be able to or may not feel comfortable, how many other workplaces out there have already allowed for people to dial into work
remotely? You can figure out some sort of hybrid system. Now, it's interesting. So I think our Friday meetings where we need to be whipping votes, collaborating with one another, I think it's critically important to get back to in-person. Our committee hearings on Zoom, I actually think we've seen more public participation as we've allowed the public to dial in and basically give their opinions via Zoom. So I think going forward on the committee process, which those are the meetings throughout the week, during work hours, I think we got to have a hybrid model where committee members can maybe be in person, the public can join by Zoom or in person. I think that's worked well to expand access to our meetings.
All right, well, how you will do your work is probably a lot less interesting and less important than what work you will do. Let's get into some of those agenda items of yours. You recently highlighted a story on KSDK about Mount Exodus, that stack of police uniforms piling up near the exits of some departments. You said this, quote, "Our crime and policing problems are complex. Bumper stickers, slogans are not real answers. Rising lawlessness is real. We need more officers. We need to pay them a competitive wage, train and equip them well, treat them with respect and hold them accountable to the people they're sworn to protect." You go on to say you won't let slogans get in the way of solutions. Which slogans are you referring to?
I mean, I'm talking about my opponent and her defund the police platform and her belief that everything's going fine as it relates to public safety when it's obvious that it's not. We've got very serious challenges with violent crime in this town. We've got very serious challenges with our police staffing, and we've got to make those a priority.
You want to pay police more?
We've got to pay police more.
How much more?
So I think we have to make sure our wage is competitive with the rest of the region. I mean, we've got 160 plus vacancies in the police department currently, and it's 160 down from 260 because we lopped 100 vacant positions off the top.
How do you pay for that? Is that higher property taxes? What does that mean?
No, it's not higher property taxes. I think it's a deep dive. You've got to go into the budget. We've got over 1,000 vacant positions in the city government. we're never going to fill a lot of those positions. We need to go through department by department and see where do we have, excess staffing, or where have we staffed in jobs that we're never going to fill, make those cuts, take those dollars and appropriate them for additional salaries and benefits, not just for police, but for all of our essential city workers. 911 operators, we're 51% short in 911 operators, meaning if you call 911, really any time of the day, there's a strong likelihood you're going to get put on hold, and that's not right.
So I hear you,
Yeah.
but forking over a bunch more money to the police in the budget isn't the same as actually hiring, training new cadets and
Right.
putting them on the force.
Yeah.
That's a challenge too, is it not?
It is.
Finding the workforce?
Mark, you're exactly right. I mean, we're not the only city struggling with staffing a police department. And I will give credit where credit's due to the current mayor. Mayor Jones is working hard on some of the personnel challenges at the city level. I mean,
She hasn't even found a chief yet.
She has not found a police chief, but she just hired a new personnel director, which I think will help. I mean, we've got to streamline our hiring process. We've got a very arcane system for hiring people in the city of St. Louis at any level, whether it's police, trash truck drivers, ambulance, EMS and ambulance service techs. We've got to make that process easier. When folks need a job, when they want to come work for the city, they want to come work for the city now, not 6 or 9 months from now. And so that process has to be streamlined. And yes, we have a hard job ahead of us convincing people to join our department, but we can never get them to join our department if we're not paying a competitive wage.
I don't know how closely you dig into the crime data and look for solutions. You talked about solutions though, so maybe you have examined some of this. 2020, you saw that skyrocket after the summer, and 2021, much of that momentum carried over. But year over year, 2021 into 2022, we saw those stats change a lot. Violent crime went way down. Property crimes have stayed high.
Yeah.
I don't know if you're hearing from police or not, but what's changing in the psychology or the strategy of people carrying out these crimes, that they're targeting properties more and people less?
Well, one, I think actually we still have an alarmingly high murder rate, and our assault first, which is shootings. That rate is still
But they're trending
pretty high.
downward.
Yeah, it's still much
From
higher than
a
we'd like
record
to
high,
see.
from a
Yes,
recent
from a
record high, I
record
should say.
high, but there's still
Not a record in the 70s and 80s, but a
Yeah.
recent record.
Yeah, and as it relates to property crimes, I mean, I think what's gone on is, bad guys aren't that stupid. A lot of them know there's no consequences. You can steal a car, you can burglarize a house, and the likelihood of anything happening to you right now in the city is very slim. And so you're seeing an increase in these crimes, especially as it relates to car thefts, as people can steal Hyundais and Kias and realize that's very easy to do if you just watch a YouTube video. And there's not enough police on the streets to catch these guys. And then even if they do catch them, we've got real challenges in the partnership between our police department and our prosecuting attorney.
Campaign cash is starting to come in down the stretch as
It is.
well.
It is.
A lot of big donors are lining up behind your campaign. What do developers see in you, the candidate, that they don't see in Megan Green?
Yeah, so, one of the things that differs me and my opponent is I don't think development's a bad word. Development isn't a dirty word. We need development. Development means jobs. It means increasing our population. It means more businesses in the city. Those are things we want. That's part of my job as the Alderman of the 7th Ward, is to bring development to my district, which I've proudly done in my last 8 years of service. And if elected, I'm going to be a champion for development projects across the city, especially in North St. Louis, where we've seen decades of disinvestment. And the difference between me and my opponent is, she thinks that these developers are all just out for themselves, when the reality is that, yes, they have to make a return. They're not going to build things if they can't make some money. Whether it's affordable housing developers or market rate housing developers, they have to be able to make a return on their investment. They also need to know what the rules are. And for the last almost 2 years, it's been very unclear to the development community what the rules are to build in this city. What mix of affordable housing do you need? What level of incentives, if any, are available in different parts of the city? They need to they need to know the answers to these things if they're going to deploy capital.
If your opponent was here, if Megan Green were here, she might respond by saying development is good for the city, but at what cost? And how do you align the city's priorities with the overall public good?
Yeah.
Does government represent the overall public good or the profit margin of the developer alone?
We most certainly represent the public good. And I would say the vast majority of the development projects in my district and throughout the city have helped the city. You got to remember, when we're using development tools to incentivize projects, we're starting usually from a base of zero. Projects that is not generating any economic activity for the city. It's creating very little value for the school district or for anyone walking by it in the city of St. Louis. So if we can build up from there and start with that basis of zero, I would say something is certainly better than nothing. And in many parts of this town, it's very challenging and expensive to build. It's an old industrial city with a lot of infrastructure challenges. And so the development community says, we want to work in your town, but we're going to need some help to get these projects off the ground. And I would add, my ward and my opponent's ward have benefited greatly from these tools. I mean, we both represent thriving, stable neighborhoods in St. Louis, some of the best neighborhoods in St. Louis. And the tools that were available for me and my opponent, those should be available for the aldermen in North St. Louis who have seen decades of disinvestment.
The St. Louis Business Journal recently wrote about one of your campaign a few campaign contributions to you to paint a contrast. Just a few weeks ago, Megan Green, your opponent, was standing outside the Union Station Hotel, organizing with workers there, and she went on social media, and she called on the city to implement a new policy, one that would say if you're going to get public funding, say through a TIF, you should also have to sign a labor peace agreement, meaning you would adopt a neutral stance and not organize against the forming of a union. Would you agree with a policy like that?
I actually think that's a good policy, and spoke to a number of the trades yesterday and reiterated my support for it. It's something we've actually used successfully. The Marriott Grand Hotel, the convention hotel downtown, years ago, well before I was on the board of aldermen. I was a little kid when it was originally developed, but there was a labor peace agreement in that project which had substantial public participation. Now that doesn't exist on the Union Station project. I think it's ironic that the incentives that allowed Union Station to expand and grow were sponsored by one of my opponent's largest supporters, but I do agree.
Who is that?
Alderwoman Ingracia, from the 6th Ward.
Okay.
But I do agree that we should, if we're going to be using any sort of public benefit for these projects, that they shouldn't, the owner shouldn't be standing in the way of unions trying to organize. Now that doesn't mean we can have a quid pro quo where we say they must be able to organize, because frankly that's improper as well, but workers should have the opportunity to do so.
But in negotiating that neutral stance, that's a way that politicians can advocate for workers.
I think so, yeah.
By using public policy to negotiate for the greater good, and you're open to that.
Yeah, I'm very much open to that.
Would you go a step farther? Are you committing to say if you become Board of Aldermen president, you're going to put that on the agenda to make sure that any future development dollars that go out the door go with that labor peace agreement?
Yeah, I think that's a fine position, and I would commit to doing that, whether it's through some overarching piece of legislation or it's done in every redevelopment agreement. I don't know. We got to talk to the development lawyers and find out what the best way to do that is. But I think that's a good position and one that I would commit to.
About 7 to 10 days after Megan Green made her stand, the hotel owners cut you a check for 50 grand. Your campaign, not you personally,
right.
To help get you elected. She tweeted, "Coincidence? I think not." Was it a coincidence?
Not at all a coincidence. I mean, the LHM, the owners of Ballpark Village and the Ballpark Hilton and the Union Station Hotel are longtime supporters of mine, and they are very worried about the direction of the city, and particularly the crime around their investments in downtown. And so they're supportive of my candidacy. It has nothing to do with the ongoing union vote at Union Station. You know, they're worried about downtown. The Cardinals, who've also contributed a large sum of money to my political action committee, are also worried about downtown. And I think they're sending a strong message that if crime's the issue and you want to keep people safe, I'm the candidate.
Let's dig into that crime issue a little bit, because you have made it a big part. You've also made public works and infrastructure part of your platform, and certainly those are issues worthy of exploring. But on the crime issue, I think some people in our audience hear people say, let's hire more police, let's pay police more, and they say, okay, I can half-heartedly get on board with these ideas. They're generally good sentiments, but come on. Where's the actual solution in that? Is that really some silver bullet? We've heard that same tired talking point for 30 years, one person just told me.
Yeah, well, so it's one part of what we need to do. Yes, we need more police. We've got to fully staff our department, and we're not doing that currently. You've got to be able to answer calls when people help. We're not staffing our 911 center right now. But you also need those deterrence mechanisms, right? You need more violence prevention. You need to expand cure violence. It's right now in a handful of neighborhoods, both in North St. Louis and in Dutchtown and South St. Louis, and it's a program involving violence interruption. It's working pretty well. It's having some success, but that's a program that could be expanded to other neighborhoods, and that's a perfect example of where we could use these American Rescue Plan Act dollars to help with that program. You know, that's not necessarily a long-term liability. Those are 3-5-year contracts. We can afford to pay for those now, and that's where we should be using these American Rescue Plan Act dollars for violence interruption, for increasing some social services, and also I think for, as you discussed, infrastructure and sort of bricks and mortar projects that this city needs to get done.
Before we let you go, last week Mayor Jones took issue with a study published by Wallet Hub that it's this credit reporting agency sort of that collects data and looks at things, but they collected data from the FBI, from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, from the Census Bureau, and compiled a whole bunch of interesting data and labeled St. Louis with the moniker as the most dangerous city in America. Now, that's not a title anybody wants.
No, certainly not.
Some people took issue with the way they compiled the data. What do you think? Is it opening a conversation we need to have? Are there real warning signs in that study?
I mean, I think if we're arguing about the statistics, we're losing. We all know crime's a problem. It needs to be the #1 priority. Every leader at City Hall needs to be getting up every day and saying, what are we doing to make St. Louis safer? What are we doing to grow our tax base? Those have to be the priorities. So if we're fighting about the stats, about whether we're first or fourth on the list, that's a problem, because the perception of St. Louis is that we have serious crime challenges, and we've got to work together to address those.
Jack Coatar, thank you for joining us on
Thanks,
the record.
Mark.
We've extended the same invitation to his rival, Megan Green, Alderwoman, who's also running for the Board of Aldermen President. That race, November 8th.
November 8th.
And Megan Green will join us at the same time next week on the record to give her side of this. Now for instant reaction to our interviews with Jack Coatar, and before that with Mark Mantovani. Joining us is Anita Manion, our political science expert and professor. For the record, let's look at both of those. There are some similarities really between both of the guests we just heard from. Both have support of police. Both seem to have more support generally from some of the corporate citizens of St. Louis County and city. Are they running for the same type of, do you see comparisons there between Jack Coatar and Mark Mantovani?
I agree. I do think there's comparisons. They're both more moderate. Well, obviously Mantovani moving from Democrat to Republican, but more pro-business. And I think both trying to frame their potential positions as administrative jobs that are focused on getting things done, and less about concerns with abortion or race or equity or other issues, that we just need to get the job done.
How potent is the political issue of being on the right side of labor unions and the working class in St. Louis, in the city especially? We saw Jack Coatar there kind of adopt the same position that Megan Green had called for, saying let's have labor peace agreements. If we're giving out public funds to private developers, they should also have some neutral position, at least against, not taking action against unions. Did you see that as a potent political issue when he moved like that?
I did. I think that was very intentional and is important, particularly in St. Louis City, more so than the county. Very
interesting. How did you react to Mark Mantovani's interview, hearing him talk about crime, both of them putting a high emphasis on that issue of crime right now?
I mean, I think it's fair to talk about crime in St. Louis. The studies have come out. We don't want our city to be perceived that way. I know sometimes we even have concerns at the university about folks coming internationally from other states worrying about crime. So certainly that perception's important to the region, but this isn't just something they're talking about in St. Louis, they're talking about it nationally. And I think what they're trying to say is, I'm running against the incumbent in Mantovani's case, and they haven't been effective on crime, but I will.
One of the things we didn't really get into with Jack Coatar was the map of the turnout. In that first sort of trial run race they had, it didn't really decide anything, and the turnout was super low, like 6.5%.
Yeah, 6%, that's right.
Do you read very much into that? How does the politics change when it goes into a much higher turnout in the midterms?
So Megan Green has the advantage of having run a citywide election before and running for state senate, so she has that more experience in that and maybe more name recognition. But we're seeing Coatar as an effective fundraiser, and that, like you said, that race was such low turnout. It's a new ball game in a general election race, in a midterm election, with lots of other things on the ballot. You're going to have a variety of people voting who didn't vote in the other race.
People in the county, do you have a read on how motivated people are to vote for that position? For example, it's a midterm year. A lot of people look at the congressional races, the Senate races. Do you get the idea that a campaign that starts out as late as Mark Mantovani did will have much success standing up awareness, getting out volunteers, knocking doors to let people know that he's not just an ordinary Republican? In fact, he used to be a Democrat. Like, is that a hard thing to do in a compressed window of time?
Well, I suspect that's part of the reason the Republicans chose him, right? Because he has run for county executive twice before, so he does have that name recognition in St. Louis County. He also, has, even though he hasn't had the time to fundraise, he's self-funding and then a quick fundraiser because he does have that experience and base here, and has experience campaigning, so he can quickly get that up and running. So I think that as far as that goes, he's an advantage versus other candidates would have been stepping in this position. I think part of maybe his advantage and part of his challenge is this move from being a Democrat for their first 2 times running to a Republican the second time. So in a sense, you're trying to say to Republicans, Hey, vote for me. I used to be a Democrat, though, in a time we hear a lot of talk about rhinos and other things. And then you're saying to Democrats, remember me? I used to be a Democrat. Vote for me. So you're trying to kind of play that game. But the upside for him could be him saying, look, I'm a moderate. I don't get into all this partisan bickering and culture wars. I'm about the job.
Rise above the bickering of partisan politics. I mean, how many people have changed their minds over the course of their life? But he could try to appeal to those folks, but might lose a little bit of that rabid support from people who want more purity in their party.
That's right. But there is certainly a contingent of conservatives who are very anti-Sam Page and will be excited to vote for somebody who is not Sam Page.
Yeah, who else can they vote for?
Right.
This isn't a primary anymore. It's no longer a purity contest. All right, before we let you go and before we wind this all down, Trish Gunby will be here next week. Jay Ashcroft, the Secretary of State, will be here next week. Also, as we said, Megan Green. What are some of the things you want to hear from those interviews? What are the things you're looking for as we get closer to Election Day?
Yeah, you know, with Megan Green, I think with her and Coatar, the distinctions are pretty clear. Trish Gunby, I really like to hear what she sees as her path to victory in a tough race.
Against Ann Wagner, the Republican there. Yeah.
That's right, and a district that has been drawn to be more Republican and less competitive. In the last two elections, it's been fairly competitive. But I'd like to hear about how she thinks she has a path forward in this race.
Yeah, she's up against the gerrymandered map in that district. And before we go, let's set the record straight on a big telling moment from Tuesday night's final debate in the Illinois governor's race, where moderators pressed State Senator Darren Bailey to show his math and explain where he would come up with $10 to $15 billion in cuts in the state budget. Watch this.
Once we do a zero-based budget, I believe there's $10 to $15 billion in that budget of waste.
And you've also said that everything is on the table. What in the $10 to $15 billion do you plan to cut? Name three things, and you have 60 seconds for that.
We're going to fire all of the agency directors because they failed.
I think I want to hear something a little more tangible. You say you're going to fire everybody and put more people in there. You're going to be paying them the same, right?
Right. Right.
So where's
agency directors that Governor Pritzker has put in place. They failed us because there's not one state agency that's doing its job.
So
They've
where
all
are you
failed us.
Where are you cutting the money then?
That is the purpose of a zero-based budget, to find that waste. $2 billion of fraud, of fraudulent payments was discovered in the Department of Employment. If $2 billion was just recently found as fraudulent employment payments, can you imagine how much more fraud or waste exists in each one of these agencies?
$2 billion sounds like a big number in fraud. Certainly if that much was in the state budget, it would be a big deal. But there's one big problem with that. Bailey cited an audit into the fraud exploiting a federal program. It was a one-time deal during the pandemic when they relaxed the restrictions and the protocols protecting against fraud so that they could get that money out the door. That was a one-time issue. Yes, the State Department of Employment Security in Illinois did help to process those claims, but again, it was helping Illinois residents access federal funds. So it adds important context to the budget debate in Illinois. Plus, Senator Darren Bailey should know better. He sits on 3 Senate committees that look at the appropriations, the budget-making process. On those panels, Bailey has important power. He can question, he can grill the different agency heads. He can question them about where they're spending their money. He can look at their budget request as each agency comes to build their budget every year. That's his job on the Appropriations Committee. He had years to grill them, question them, look for fraud and waste, and when he was put on the spot to show any of that fraud and waste or to come up with one line item in the budget where he would cut $10 to $15 billion or a quarter of the state's spending, he couldn't point to one of those issues. Next week, Democrat Trish Gunby runs for Congress against Republican Ann Wagner. Gunby joins us on the record. Progressive Alderwoman in St. Louis, Megan Green, also running against Jack Coatar to lead the Board of Aldermen in St. Louis. She will join us. And Missouri Secretary of State Jay Ashcroft joins us as voters prepare to cast their ballots. Until then, we're off the record.